Daniel Simon at Baton Rouge Community College. And of course, this week I also will be doing a review for the final exam, which will be on the Roman Empire. I'll also talk about as well, like the framework of the end of the semester, what kind of assignments that we have left overall. I did want to share with you, of course, a few things coming up, of course, about that. Of course, I'll talk, a little bit later, of course, get into the final exam review. But let me get into, of course, I'll talk about the main topics today, of course, that'll be on the final exam, of course, on the Roman Empire. I'll go through all the questions. Of course, I did post that study guide of the actual, questions that are kind of be on the actual exam for the Roman Empire. So I'll go ahead and share those with you again. I think they appeared at the end of the PowerPoint lectures I gave you, but I did post them also in Canvas. They should be also posted with the actual exam later next week as well. So yeah, let me go ahead and first talk about the beginning. So going back to after 44 BC, so what alliance did Octavian form in 43 BC and who was in it? That was the second triumvirate that formed. Octavian formed this alliance with two men, Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus. And of course, they used that alliance to defeat the liberators, the ones that had killed Julius Caesar, led to the so-called Liberators' Civil War, where they defeated them and Brutus and Cassius killed themselves. Remember that. How did Octavian and Mark Antony divide up the Republic as a dictatorship? They eventually pushed Marcus Lepidus out, and Octavian kind of ruled over the West, and then Antony ruled over the East with Cleopatra and her children. And that created conflict between the two, and that led to a civil war. What civil war ended the Roman Republic? The War of Actium, which happened around 30 BC. And Octavian's forces invaded the eastern part of the Republic and defeated Antony and Cleopatra. And then, remember, those two, Antony and Cleopatra, committed suicide. What was the outcome of Octavian defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra? Well, Octavian then consolidated all the power in the Republic and then formed an empire out of it afterwards. What is Octavian usually called after he becomes the first Roman emperor? Octavian is known as Augustus, or Caesar Augustus. And after that, of course, he forms the Roman Empire and, of course, is seen as also the founder of it. What historical period follows the Roman Republic in Roman history? Obviously, the Roman Empire, of course, we're talking about. What does Octavian do after consolidating sole power of Rome? It's kind of a repeat question in there. But yeah, obviously becomes the Roman emperor. And he's called Augustus, like we've talked about, Caesar Augustus. But the name he preferred, the title he preferred, was Princeps or Princeps Civitas, which meant first citizen. And that led to the so-called Principate of the Roman Empire, where the emperors kind of went by that title up to the time of Diocletian, I guess, in 284. And Diocletian will later use another title, which is Dominus. What was the age of Augustus? What era of Roman peace begins under his reign? The age of Augustus was the nickname of Augustus' reign, which was 44 years. And it was considered a golden age. It's also called the Augustan age. And it's not just a period where the Roman Empire starts to flourish, being, fully developed, but it's also like a period of like literature, art. You have a lot of famous writers at the time, like Livy, I think I talked about before, and so on. Virgil, they're kind of all writing, about that same time period. Augustus also started what they call the Pax Romana, which was that 200 period in Roman history, which was the peak of that empire, which goes roughly, I guess, 27 BC up to about 180 CE or AD. Who are some historians that wrote about the early emperors of Rome? I think I mentioned several of them. Tacitus, considered one of the greatest Roman historians. wrote the Annals and the Histories of Rome. I think those are the two most famous ones. Suetonius had a series of books called the 12 Caesars. And then Cassius Dio, sometimes Dio Cassius, wrote a series of books. I think it was 80 volumes. So it's called The History of Rome as well. What was the Praetorian Guard? It was the imperial bodyguard of the Roman emperors, and it was founded by Augustus during his reign. And so it's something that would be kind of important later politically, behind the power of the emperors. What dynasty was founded by Augustus? Who were the emperors that were in it? Augustus created a dynasty called later the Julio-Claudian dynasty because it has two families in it, the Julian-Claudian families. Gus is the founder, and then you have four other emperors, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. So those are the five that are basically in it. What are these emperors famous for? Well, Emperor Tiberius was a Roman general, was the second Roman emperor. He was adopted by Augustus and actually married Augustus' daughter, and he was also his son-in-law. And Tiberius was an unpopular ruler. Remember, I told you he was tyrannical, and it's under him that they think Jesus Christ was, crucified. And so after he died, he was replaced by Caligula, who was known as Little Boots, who was his nephew. And Caligula was one that emperor I told you that maybe went crazy or insane, some people think. And Caligula was later assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. So he had a very short reign, only about 4 years. And then his uncle reigned, who was Claudius, who was from Gaul. And Claudius was actually considered a pretty good emperor. Him and Augustus were the two best of that dynasty. Claudius was one of the first emperors to give people citizenship outside of Italy. He was also the emperor that started the invasion of Britain because the Romans, over like a 40, 50-year period, try to conquer it afterwards. Claudius was also, they think, possibly poisoned or murdered by his fourth wife, Agrippina. Then you got Nero, that picture, of course, on the left. Nero is the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasties. He was another tyrannical kind of ruler that was later unpopular. He's not famous for a bunch of things. He's known for the Boudica revolt, where in Britain that Queen Boudica, remember some of those Celtic Britain tribes revolted. Also, Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. He was later blamed for it. And then don't forget also, Nero was one of the first to be the one that will persecute the Christians, first of several emperors that do that. And his reign eventually collapsed in 68, causing a civil war. And of course, he committed suicide. Then we talked about the early background of Christianity. We talked about Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus Christ. And of course, remember, he was considered the central figure, maybe founder of Christianity later, which is based off of his life and teachings. So he's kind of the important figure associated with that. And I told you how Christianity becomes the largest religion in the world, eventually founded in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, where Israel is now. The governor of Judea that put him to death was Pontius Pilate, who, by the way, is mentioned not just in the New Testament, he's mentioned in multiple sources. In fact, Flavius Josephus writes a lot about him, if you know about that. What was the Apostolic Age? Apostolic Age was the period after Jesus' crucifixion. Goes up to about 100. It's the period where the apostles began to spread Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Who were some famous apostles of Jesus? The closest one to Jesus was St. Peter, or they call him Peter, or Simon Peter, of course, who later is seen by the Catholic Church as being the first pope or bishop of Rome. St. John, the apostle, sometimes called the evangelist, was another important figure as well. He was believed to be one of the apostles that they think wrote the Gospel of John and maybe even the book of Revelation. He had a brother named James the Greater, St. James, who they think was important in spreading Christianity to the western part of the Roman Empire, as far away as Spain. Also talked about James the Less. James the Less or Lesser was another saint, Saint James. They think he may have been a brother of Jesus, and sometimes later some people call him James the Just as well. They also had Saint Matthew was another one that was kind of famous too as an apostle. Why was Paul of Saul, of course, St. Paul, Paul of Tarsus, important to early Christianity? They think Paul was the one apostle that was the most important one, most influential in the first century. Originally from Turkey, Paul converted, originally called Saul, converted to Christianity and began communicating with different churches, throughout the Roman world, and traveled throughout the Roman world and, preached to different people. And of course, Paul was known for his epistles, the epistles of Paul, which make up a bunch of the books in the New Testament later. It's often called Paul the Apostle or also the Apostle to the Gentiles as well. What are the four gospel accounts of the New Testament? I already talked about that before, but Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John, of course, are the four gospels that'll be eventually canonized, I think, by the 4th century by the early Christian church. What two main Christian sects kind of emerged in the 1st century BC? Well, Christianity kind of divided. You got those that were like Jewish Christians that were the original Christians that were, following Jesus. I think a lot of those were called Nazarenes sometimes. They did have another group called the Ebionites that kind of broke off from them as well. And you had those Christians that were Gentile Christians, or I guess Roman Christians that were pagans that converted to Christianity. They were never Jewish, that kind of thing. And so you get these two that kind of basically split. The ones that were the Jewish Christians, they faded away because of the fact that the Second Temple was destroyed. It's part of why they split it, was because of that. And then Judaism kind of broke away from Christianity because of theological differences between the two. The Jews don't think Jesus is the Messiah, that kind of thing. Also, I told you about the Jewish tax was another reason why people wanted to be a Christian instead of a Jew, because if you were Jewish in the Roman Empire, you had to pay this tax that they had. So there's a lot of different things that broke them apart, but Judaism goes on to be more like rabbinic Judaism with synagogues and things like that. And then the Christians become more Romanized around churches and priests. Then, of course, I talked about these two rival Christian churches that eventually emerge that were kind of part of the Roman Empire. In the West, you have the Roman Catholic Church based in Rome with the Pope later. Then you got the Eastern Orthodox Church based in Constantinople that broke away, that was part of the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. I think their religious leaders called a patriarch, that later. But those two break apart. And then by the end of the Middle Age, you have also Protestantism too that kind of comes in. Who took over and founded the Flavian dynasty after the Julio-Claudian dynasty collapsed with the death of Nero? Well, I told you had this civil war where they had the year of the 4 emperors. In that picture on the left, you get Flavius Vespasian, that seizes power, who was a Roman general. And so Vespasian was the one that founds the Flavian dynasty. What famous war broke out around 66 AD under Emperor Nero in the region of Judea? Well, Vespasian became famous for fighting in that war, along with his son Titus. So both those two men, those two generals, actually were the ones that put down the revolt, which was a very bloody conflict, by the way. The first Jewish-Roman war, or some people call it the Great Jewish War or Revolt or something like that, or just the Jewish War. But it made both those men famous because Titus goes on to, sack Jerusalem and the Second Temple. What famous building did Vespasian build? Vespasian was known for constructing the Roman Colosseum, that huge amphitheater or stadium, which was used for mass entertainment. And they think Titus is the one that finished it and opened it up. What was Emperor Titus known for? Titus was a Roman general who was a son of Vespasian. And if you know about Titus, he was the first son to succeed his father as emperor, which he did in the year 79. And Titus had previously been known for, being involved in that Jewish war. He had sacked Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple. And then he's also known for the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which destroyed cities like Pompeii in the southern part of Italy, where Naples is. And so Titus had a very short reign. It was only like a little bit over 2 years. And then he had a brother who came in, they considered tyrannical, who was Emperor Domitian. And Domitian reigned for 15 years, the longest reign of the three Flavian emperors. And Domitian was known for being assassinated in 96 CE or AD. Then you have the period of the five good emperors comes in, 96 to 180. Remember I talked about how the five good emperors, they had in a row, according to Machiavelli. And it's a period where you have this dynasty that reigns called the Nerva-Antonine dynasty. And the five emperors that were in it were Marcus Nerva, Marcus Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and then you had Marcus Aurelius. And I'll kind of go through those. Nerva was the first one. Nerva was like this advisor of Domitian that was put in power as emperor by this Roman Senate. And then he was succeeded by Trajan. Remember, I told you these emperors were sometimes called later adoptive emperors because each one adopted a successor and all that. Trajan was this emperor that came from Spain who was really a general. He was kind of like this militaristic leader that was known for his conquests in the east, like conquering Dacia in Romania, parts of Turkey like Armenia and Georgia. Then he also took back Iraq against the Parthian Empire as examples. And Trajan was known for his building projects. Remember, he was the one that was called Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. And he was known for his building projects like Trajan's Forum, that was known for its markets and its baths, and the famous, also the Trajan's Column. Then he was succeeded by Hadrian. They think was a cousin of his, who was also from Spain. Hadrian was known as the Greekling. Remember that? He was kind of this emperor that was fond of art, especially Greek culture and things like that, and was this amateur architect that's well known. Hadrian was the one that abandoned Trajan's expansionism and went more to building like fortifications and more stable borders. Hadrian's known for building Hadrian's Wall, which was this fortification that the Romans constructed to defend the northern border of Rome and Britain from barbarians. It was about an 80-mile long wall. And he was also known for other building projects like rebuilding what they call the Pantheon Temple, which was a famous Roman temple that had been destroyed by a fire previously. I think going back to the time of, I want to say, Emperor Titus, and so he reconstructed it. I think also Hadrian, I mentioned before, was the one that also put down the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was that other famous Jewish revolt that happened in Israel. Then Antoninus Pius came in. He was a famous emperor that was really the peak ruler of the Pax Romana. He kind of starts a dynasty called the Antonines. And if you remember correctly, it was a very peaceful period of the Roman Empire, very few wars going on. I think the only thing that he did that was famous was he conquered part of Britain up to where Scotland is. And he built a fortification up there. It was called the Antonine Wall, but they abandoned it later. And then Antoninus Pius adopted two men as his successors, Marcus Aurelius and also Lucius Verus, who became kind of like brothers. And they co-ruled together afterwards. There, of course, Marcus Aurelius on the left in that picture. Marcus Aurelius is probably considered one of the greatest of the five good emperors. The last one they have. Marcus Aurelius was known for a lot of his military campaigns. Like if you know about it, Lucius Verus was famous for retaking part of Mesopotamia and Syria that had basically fallen to the Parthian Empire. They fought a series of Parthian wars over there. And then the big wars that Marcus Aurelius fought in, of course, was the Marcomannic Wars, where they fought for control of the Danube River Valley to prevent Germanic peoples from invading into the empire. And then he was also known for being this philosopher-type emperor I told you about, where he studied Stoicism, and he wrote a series of books that were compiled later into a work that was called the Meditations, or the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which were really personal writings that were never meant for publication, but they became famous later in modern times. Then you have Emperor Commodus comes in. What was he famous for? Commodus was the son of Marcus Aurelius. He was in part of the Antonine dynasty. And he ruled afterwards as sole ruler after his father died. And they think Commodus is the emperor they think that ended the Pax Romana. So I think some claim that 180, the year 180 AD or CE is considered when the Pax Romana comes to end. And remember, Commodus was this tyrannical ruler that some people thought was insane. And he was the one that was famous for fighting as a gladiator, like in the Colosseum. And his assassination in the year 192 caused this major civil war that was called the Year of the Five Emperors. That happened in 193. What was the Severan dynasty? What emperors were part of this imperial Roman dynasty? Well, at the end of that civil war, Year of the Five Emperors, this African general seized power, Septimius Severus, who was from Libya. He came in, founded his own dynasty called the Severan dynasty, lasts from 193 to 235. And he and his relatives kind of controlled it throughout that period. It's a very bloodthirsty dynasty, by the way, because most of the emperors were killed, except for him. And he had a famous wife you may have heard of. I told you about Empress Consort Julia Domna. And Julia Domna had two sons, of course, through them, which was Caracalla and Geta, who I think were the only twin sons, whatever, that reigned as emperors, actually co-ruling at one point. Now, if you remember correctly, Caracalla was the one that killed his brother Geta because he wanted to rule by himself. And Caracalla is famous for his Edict of Caracalla that gave people citizenship throughout the Roman Empire if they were free. And Caracalla was also known for the baths of Caracalla too. They have this guy named Macrinus, who was a Roman prefect. I think he was in the Praetorian Guard. He killed off Caracalla and seized power. And then later you had two more rulers that reigned, Elagabalus and Severus Alexander, who were cousins of the Severans. They also reigned later, but they were both killed as well. Then says, what historical period of the 3rd century almost caused the collapse of the Roman Empire? Well, you have this 50-year period I told you about called the crisis of the 3rd century. It goes from 235 to 284. After the last Severan, Severus Alexander, was assassinated, it created this chaotic event where there was like this imperial anarchy throughout the empire and behind the throne, and the empire almost collapsed. They also had a lot of invasions, economic problems, and the empire almost broke up as well. And what were the emperors nicknamed during this 50-year period that they were in power? A lot of the emperors were called barracks emperors or soldier emperors because they came out of the Roman army, a lot of them. And there was even a case I told you where in the year 238 CE or AD, you had 6 emperors that reigned. They call it the so-called Year of the 6 Emperors. And so a lot of chaos on the throne that was kind of going on. What 2 empires broke off from the Roman Empire during the crisis period of the 3rd century? They had one empire in the west that formed called the Gallic Empire that controlled like Gaul and Britain. And they had another one called the Palmyrene Empire that also broke away, that controlled part of Turkey, Israel, and Syria down into Egypt. And this general named Aurelian came in, and you see on the left there, Emperor Aurelian, he basically reconquered those 2 states and forced them to reform with the Roman Empire. So he reunited the whole thing, and so he was known as the so-called restorer of the world. I think there's a repeat question in that slide right there, but yeah, the emperors were called barracks emperors a lot during that time period. Also, Aurelian, don't forget, he was the one that built the so-called Aurelian walls, which were these fortifications that superseded the Severian, the Servian walls, excuse me, that had been previously built a long time ago during the Roman kingdom. And so those became some of the main fortifications they used to defend the city. What new title did Emperor Diocletian? Now, Diocletian comes in, he begins making reforms to the Roman Empire that help save it, kind of in that crisis period at that point. And he adopts a more authoritarian, autocratic title. It's more despotic, which, of course, is called Dominus. And it means either lord or master. And they kind of get rid of that pretense that the emperor is a first citizen, that kind of thing. And so from then on, around 284 up to, I guess, the fall of the Roman Empire and after, that's the so-called Dominate period. So the later part of the Roman Empire. What political reform divided the Roman Empire into four parts with the Western and Eastern Roman empires? The tetrarchy, of course, is what he, of course, creates. And what it does, it basically has this case where the empire is ruled by four rulers, which are called tetrarchs. And it has two main emperors, which were both called Augustus. They have a Western Augustus and an Eastern Augustus. So those are the two main emperors. And then you got these two successor emperors that are under them that are called Caesars. So you got a Western Caesar and you have an Eastern Caesar. So they basically break the empire up into four parts, basically, where each one kind of rules over each one. So the tetrarchs are almost like having four kings or four emperors in a sense for a short time there. But it lasts up until like about, I think I told you before, about 324. What was the Edict of Maximum Prices developed by Emperor Diocletian about 301? That was an attempt to set like the price of goods throughout the Roman Empire, and even it fixed people's like wages and things like that. And it was an attempt to kind of reel in inflation problems throughout the Roman Empire, but it actually ultimately failed. People ignored it. And a lot of the problems behind inflation weren't really solved until Constantine the Great came in. And a lot of it just had to do with like a lot of the money, which I think a lot of the money I told you before was kind of starting to be debased. They're taking the minerals out of the money and things like that, and they had to add that back in to make them worth more, the money. What was the Diocletianic persecution or Great Persecution? That was the last persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire, which was started by Diocletian in the Tetrarchs, and it was an attempt to save the traditional Roman religions, paganism throughout the Roman Empire. And I told you how Christianity was becoming very popular. In fact, Christianity, I think, had increased by something like 600% since the mid-3rd century. And so ultimately it failed. And of course, later on, the empire, by the end of the 5th century, is going to become a Christian state mostly. What Roman leader eventually ended the tetrarchy after civil wars broke out between the various four rulers? That would be on the left there, Constantine I, also called the Great. And he would eventually conquer the West and become the main Western Augustus when he defeated the ruler, for I guess the one that wanted to control the West too, which was Maxentius, who he beat at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Supposedly at that bridge in 312 or around that time, they think that Constantine began to convert to Christianity. Eventually, he'll be, also baptized as well. And so that led to eventually the end of the persecution of Christians. So him and this other emperor in the East, Eastern Augustus, which will be Galerius, both of them passed edicts that ended the persecutions. Galerius had the Edict of Serdica, also called Toleration, in 311. And then the Edict of Milan was passed in 313 by Constantine the Great. Both those made Christianity a legal religion throughout the empire, and that ended the persecutions afterwards. But Christianity will not be the state religion, like the only state religion they have, until Theodosius the Great comes in later. What was the first council of Nicaea that met in 325 AD or CE? That was one of the first major church councils, which met in the eastern part of the Roman Empire in Turkey. And they met there to decide like the theological background of the Christian church, like what books they would use and things like that, and what God is, etc. What were some Christian theological reforms that were famous for they developing? Well, one thing was they decided that Arian Christianity or Arianism was heretical, like the teachings of Arius from Egypt. And that led to the development of the Trinity or Trinitarianism afterwards. And then they also forced Christians to also say, like the Nicene Creed, by the way, which was that Christian prayer of faith that they put like in the Mass. And that was, of course, an attempt to stamp out, of course, Arian heresy, basically. Also, they decided like what the Easter Sunday dates and things like that were put in afterwards, they think. And then afterwards, too, they think that the Bible starts to be compiled, like the New Testament and later the Old Testament as well, especially by like 400. What famous city did Constantine found? Where was it established within the Roman Empire? Constantine founded Constantinople, which became this new capital of the Roman Empire, found in the east, in western Turkey, south of the Black Sea, in the Sea of Marmara. And if you know about this capital, it'll later merge to be the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. And it's now called Istanbul. How long does this empire continue in the Middle Ages? It, of course, continued up to 1453. They call it Byzantine Empire because they believe the city was built on this Greek city that was called Byzantium or Byzantium. Remember that correctly? So that's the primary name. It's called later, but I think people call it still Roman Empire or Romania, I think is the common name they call it. But you get these two separate empires that eventually kind of are created, Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine. What was Emperor Theodosius the Great famous for as a ruler of the Roman Empire? He's famous for two things. One, he's the one that passes this edict that's called the Edict of Thessalonica in the year 380. It was issued, I think, somewhere in Greece. And what it did was it made Nicene Christianity the state religion. And so that led to the end of like paganism as being a religion, traditional religions in the Roman Empire, which they began to persecute pagans and ban it. They also banned the Olympics too in Greece as well, a little later, I think around 393. And then I told you that 395, what happened was he split the empire among his two sons, Arcadius in the east, Eastern Empire, and then Honorius got the western part of the empire overall. And he was the last emperor to be the sole ruler of both halves, like basically sole ruler of the Roman Empire. And then he broke it up permanently after that. What were causes of the decline of the Roman Empire, especially in the West? Well, the West had a lot of internal problems that they had, like we talked about before, under the 3rd century. But they think the thing that eventually killed it off was the fact that it was invaded by all these different barbarians. So you get the barbarian invasions, or they call it the migration period that comes in, where you get these different Germanic and other Eurasian peoples that enter into the Roman Empire. What were some German peoples that invaded the Western Empire? There was a bunch of them. The Goths, of course, the most famous, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, Vandals, the Franks, the different Anglo-Saxon tribes, and then Alemanni, I think, was another that was very famous as well. Then you had various people like those different kind of the Slavic peoples, of course, that entered into the empires as well. The Huns were very famous as well. Of course, the most feared were the Huns, if you know about that. Why were many of them called federati? A lot of the Germans were called federati because they were used as mercenaries. That's like the Roman term for like Roman mercenaries or foreign mercenaries that were hired within the Roman Empire. And over time, they take over the West, like especially the Germans do, and they'll eventually carve the empire up in the West into different barbarian type kingdoms that'll eventually come about and lead to the Middle Ages. What areas they eventually settle and occupy? I'll kind of briefly talk about this again, but the Visigoths were one of the most famous of these first barbarians that attacked the Roman Empire, which started in the Eastern Empire. And under this king named King Alaric, they marched westward and attacked Italy, and they actually sacked Rome in the year 410. And they kept marching westward. They eventually took over the area where Spain is now, and they formed a kingdom out of it that was called the Visigothic Kingdom. Then another famous Germanic people, the Vandals, where you know where the word vandalism comes from. They also attacked the Roman Empire too, led by this king named King Gazaric. Gazaric invaded into the Western Empire, but he crossed the Mediterranean and took over North Africa, where he would form eventually a kingdom out of that area that's called the Vandal Kingdom. But the Vandals were also known for sacking Rome too in the year 455 as well. Franks were another one. The Franks were this Germanic people. I think it's kind of Western Germany. They attack also Gaul and seize it, and they'll form a kingdom out of it later, which is the Francia, or the Kingdom of the Franks, which is founded by this king named King Clovis. We'll get to like in the Middle Ages later. But that's the Franks. That's where you get the word France from, of course, later. And then the Anglo-Saxons were these Germanic peoples in the northern part of Europe. They crossed the North Sea, attacked Rome and Britain, eventually seized control of it, and they eventually break it up into different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms as well. This kind of leads into medieval England a little later, of course, after that. Who were the Huns? Of course, that last barbarian group I got into. The Huns were these Eurasian peoples, nomadic peoples that came out of the East. And they were famous, kind of like the Mongols, were fighting on horseback with composite bow, swords, etc. And the Huns attacked the Eastern and the Western Roman empires. You know about this, I told you there were these two emperors that were kind of cousins that were fighting at the same time to stop the Huns and other barbarians from taking over the empire. In the East, Eastern Roman Empire, you had Theodosius II. He was the grandson of Theodosius the Great. He was one who built the Theodosian walls, and so he had to try to fight off the Huns and other barbarians. They were attacking the East, and the Theodosian walls really prevented some of these barbarian groups from really taking Constantinople, if you know about that. And then he had a cousin in the West, Valentinian III. I told you he was like one of the last great rulers in the West. He reigned like something like 30 years. He also fought off the Huns, and part of why he was successful was he had some great generals under him, like Flavius Aetius, the last of the Romans. Then, of course, you had Attila the Hun, the scourge of God. He attacks, of course, the Roman Empire. Attila was the greatest king, of the Huns. And Hunnic Empire under him, they first attacked the Eastern Roman Empire, which mostly failed to conquer it, of course. And then he's more famous for attacking the Western Roman Empire, which he did in the 450s. Early 450s, like 451 to 452 mostly. And what areas did Attila Hun invade and almost conquer in the West? first tried to conquer Gaul, where France is. And in Gaul, which he sacked a lot, if you know about that, I talked about before, the Battle of Catalonian Plains, he was actually defeated by a Roman barbarian army, which was kind of compiled of like Romans and Germanic federati. And I told you how Flavius Aetius led this coalition of forces that would beat him in June of 451. It's also called Catalonian Fields, or I think something called also the Battle of Chalons as well. And so he then tried to attack Italy, remember, in 452, but the Catholic Church intervened, and they think Pope Leo the First, they think somehow turned Attila back. I'm thinking they must have bribed him. That's probably what they did. But he died in 453, and the Hunnic Empire then collapsed. He was later seen as one of the last major Western Roman emperors to step down. Of course, I told you Romulus Augustulus. He was this little kid you see on the left. I don't know, he may have been like 12 or 13 or something like that, the oldest. And he was the last major emperor they have in the West. He'd only been reigning for less than a year. And he was forced to abdicate by this Germanic general named Odoacer, who made himself king in Italy after that. And so following that, there were no more emperors in the West. What year is seen as being the date when the Western Roman Empire collapsed or existed no more a Western ruler? 476 AD or CE, of course, is seen as the year. Of course, I told you how Edward Gibbon, they think in modern times, in the 19th century, wrote that famous series of books called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He popularized that idea of that. But in reality, the emperor, I guess in the East, I think it was Emperor Zeno at the time, was actually the emperor in the West. There's only one ruler now. But the barbarians that were taking over the West, they didn't recognize an emperor in the West and all that. They kind of create their own states out of it. And that leads into the Middle Ages, of course, following that. So that's the major, questions I've got in the study guide for, of course, the final exam. Like I said, I'm not going to post it till May 1st. I'll kind of let it run from May 1st to May 12th will be the dates. There will be no extension, by the way, on the final. So if for some reason you didn't take it or whatever, you'll get a 0 on it. Of course, some of you may be exempt. If you have an A+ going into it. If you have a high grade, you might want to take it anyway, which you could. Then you can also, of course, take the final exam bonus quiz, which I'll be posting that too at the same time, May 1st as well, which will be on recorded lectures on the Middle Ages. So, but like I said, I want to remind you about all those different events I've got coming up with the end of the semester. I'll kind of show it to you again. But don't forget, third key terms. I've still left that open, but I think I've got it open for a few more days this week. I know. If you haven't turned that in, you turn. If you're going to be exempt from the final, you got to turn that in, third vocab. Otherwise, you have to take the final. Of course, book reports. I'll probably leave that open a few days into next week a little bit as well. Canvas quiz number 5 is not due till May 12th. So like if you're exempt from the final, you got to take that too. As well. Final exam will open on May 1st, of course, and extend to May 12th. And then, of course, like I said, that final exam bonus quiz, which will be on previously recorded lectures on the Middle Ages, that won't open until May 1st and go till May 12th. I'll have announcements later coming out, of course, about these other assignments for the finals and all that. Now I told you about the bonus assignments remaining. First, second, final exam study guides due May 12th. If you're doing the Veterans Project or the Student Historical Documentary Project, that's not due till May 13th as well. Now, like I said, I'm doing some end of the semester makeups. If anybody's interested in makeup or needs one for some assignment they missed or whatever, do email me about that, of course. Now, we do have the student exemptions to the final exam. Don't forget as well. And like I said, Yeah, you can be exempt from the final. Like if you have an A plus average, 96% or higher, of course, going to the final. But remember, you have to finish those assignments. Canvas quiz number 5, third vocab, book report, all those have to be done. All of them, all 3, of course. So you have to take all those or complete all those overall. Or you have to take the final, of course, and all that. So it's kind of like just talking about some things at the end of the semester, of course. Also, don't forget about turning in anything else you've got missing for the semester, like different assignments, of course, in the past, those makeups, etc. But I think that's about it overall. Hope everybody else has rest of the great semester going in. I know we have finals coming up soon. Next week will kind of be like a dead week for my class. So this will be kind of, preparation into, of course, the final coming up. So I will post this on my YouTube channel, and I'll also put it, of course, in Canvas as well for y'all. So y'all take care. Hope everybody, like I said, has a great rest of the semester. If I see you on campus, of course, like I said, talk to me and all that. But I do have a History 1123 class that I also teach, which is kind of like a continuation of this class. I think that's more in the modern history that we have. But y'all have, like I said, great rest of the semester, and have also a great summer also coming up as well. So everybody take care. See y'all later.